from fighting the wars to sitting here in New York, it has been quite a journey. Is it possible to give a summary, or is it going to be a long summary?
No, look, I grew up in the United States, went to Bucknell University, played football there, was in the military for a little while, did a deployment overseas, came back, built 2 small technology companies, then went and ran a number of product and growth teams at Facebook, and started a micro VC fund with my partner, Jason Williams.
Why Facebook? What happened there? Why did you go?
I thought it was the best way to learn and move my career forward. Like it was definitely a learning decision more than anything else. I was at a point in life where it was either I'm going to go to business school or I'm going to go and learn from people who have built these large, massive companies. I'm very glad that I chose to go to Facebook. From a learning perspective, I got indoctrinated to a culture and a thought process. I saw, one of the most successful companies of our lifetime.
What period is this?
At work.
What year?
2014.
Is this when Shamat was leading? Who
no,
was like
Chamath had left at that time.
Okay.
So the person I worked with most closely in terms of really was a great role model was this guy, Alex Schultz, who I think his official title, at least then, was head of internet marketing. But he was one of 3 people who lead the growth team at Facebook. He's been there probably over a decade now. And I always joke and say that Alex was fantastic because he knew the perfect balance between pushing us to kind of have ownership and really push these growth teams, but also when to say, hey, here's some advice, here's some things that you should look at. And the great story about Alex is he actually put himself through college. He paid for it with a website on paper airplanes. So he was so good at SEO and traffic and monetizing it, etc., that he literally paid for college with this website. And so you can go Google it, and it's pretty cool to see. So it's an awesome experience.
The guys who cracked SEO early, because I remember I went to Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
I learned the same. People from McKinsey, this is how you learn SEO, SEM, but still, because when you're sitting there learning, it's but it's all about being early, because if you have the time on your side, Google values that. So to learn that early, it's the best experience ever.
It's like anything else, right? When there's new things, if you can understand it and you can be good at it early on, you get the benefit of 1, the knowledge, but 2, the experience, right? The time. Yeah. And I think that SEO is a great example of that. Crypto is a great example of that. And there's many
stocks,
others.
Investments, index fund,
everything, right?
Yeah.
So it's just having really, really long time horizons in life is important. And the people who are able to be patient and disciplined, I think, have an advantage over those who kind of, run from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and constantly try to just get rich quick or do something that is short-sighted.
Yeah, but the career track in Facebook, because I imagine if you're at Facebook, there has to be a lot of opportunities going forward. So what happens when you decide to think, I think I want to start something myself? Is it like the inner entrepreneur speaking to you, or?
Yeah, so there's plenty of people who leave Facebook and or any of the large tech companies. It's not just specific to Facebook, but they go to other companies, right? So whether they're mid-stage, early stage, late stage, whatever, there's plenty of people who leave and say, I want to go to a different industry. And there's obviously a lot of people who leave and say, I want to start my own company. And so when people are leaving to start their own company, for the most part, they're very well supported by their colleagues from Facebook, right? So people will angel invest. They'll provide kind of insight, some advice. Hey, you should go talk to my friend who might be able to help with this. Oh, you're looking for an engineer. I know my buddy from this other company, right? He's looking for a job. All that kind of stuff. So I think that it goes back to this idea that Silicon Valley will probably will never be replaced, right? Meaning that Silicon Valley will go away and something else will replace it. And it's because the lock-in of the people, the resources, the knowledge, the experience,
universities, Stanford,
all of it. So it's a very unique place that's been the beneficiary, again, going back to time, of now, 50, 60, 70 years, right, of this kind of innovation trend in that area.
Yeah, I remember going to Berkeley. I moved from Norway to take 1 semester at Berkeley, and the culture that hits you is wow. Because when you live in Norway, right, you're not allowed to say, I'm going to build the next Facebook. I mean, it's not something you even think about. Yep. But after 1 week, it's okay, is this how it is? That should be the ambition.
It's crazy,
of course,
right?
it gives you a lot of fuel to go forward. But still, I'm just thinking, you were a quick period at Snapchat. Is that something you want to talk about? What happened? Or is it sort of
Yeah, I mean, look, everything is public, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I basically left Facebook, was hired as the head of growth at Snapchat for a short period of time. Not a great experience, and I moved on to go and start a micro VC fund.
Yeah.
Did that with my partner Jason. And we basically started to invest in early stage companies, invested in over 60 of them in a very short period of time. And it's gone very well. So that kind of led us into investing full time like we're doing today.
Can you tell the story about the data center to Jason? How we used some tires? It's a great story, and why it matters, the price and like free energy and.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is, Jason has been very heavily involved in a company called PRTI, and both of us have made personal investments over time, and again, Jason's much more hands-on, helping the company to scale. And what that business does is it has something called a thermal demanufacturing process, which is a really big word, but in the simplest terms, it gets paid to take tires in on the front end of the business as like a waste management, right? So think of it just like a trash business almost. You take the tires in and they get paid to do that. And they're being paid to dispose of the tire, right? What they do in the disposal process is they basically take the tire, they put it into a reactor, and there's a proprietary process that they put the tire through in that reactor that breaks the tire down into the base resources, right? So it breaks it down into oil, steel, carbon, and syngas are the four outcomes of that process. They sell the oil and the steel as a commodity, so just like you would sell oil or steel traditionally, and then they take the carbon and the syngas and they essentially turn it into power. Right, so there's a generator and a whole bunch of stuff involved in that process, and a turbine, et cetera. And so when it goes through that process, you have a power source. And originally, the company was going to just sell the power into the grid, right? So just be a power generator, sell it into it, 3.5 cents, whatever the amount of money is. As we had started to get excited about cryptocurrencies, the mining business, we had already had some miners that were running in another facility. We said, why would we sell the power into the grid if this power is super valuable and we could just mine with that power? There's an advantage because the business was on a unit economic basis break even because we get paid to take the tires and then we sell the oil and the steel. So the power, it's not free in the sense of, there's no cost associated, but from an OpEx standpoint, it was quote unquote free, right? And so we said, look, let's just build miners right here. So we started building mines right there on site to use this power and monetize it ourselves rather than sell it to the grid. The reason, obviously, in the mining business, why it's so important is the cost of power is the largest input. Right. So when you have that input cost, what happens is if you can drive it closer and closer to zero, you actually become more profitable on the mining side. Exactly. So it was this huge advantage that we had in mining. And that actually pushed us really far down the rabbit hole in crypto and Bitcoin, because when you start mining, then you need to figure out digital wallets, you need to figure out exchanges, you need to figure out, reporting, all this stuff. And it was so early that like we would just like email people and literally like the CEO would respond, right? And be like, hey, we're looking at like digital wallets, and like, wait, the CEO's responding? Okay. and so we decided, hey, we should probably go invest in some of these companies on top of just be users of their products.
Yeah, but I think that's a very important point, and I think it's an important lesson to every industry, because I had the same experience. Like reading Bitcoin, the white paper, seeing some documentaries on Netflix. Of course, it gives you insights. But at the moment, you're actually trying to build a mining center. You have to go very deep down on an infrastructure level and understand the pieces. Because it's a lot of pieces, right? It's like politics. I mean, Bitcoin is it's almost like an invention. It's not a product. It's not a service.
For sure.
It's like
it's a core protocol.
Yeah, exactly. So, but can you tell me about the first time you remember reading about Bitcoin, or the first time you went into the rabbit hole? Is there some stories here, some people you met?
I've told the story a bunch of times, but the first time I ever heard about Bitcoin was 2014 at Facebook. We had hired David Marcus from PayPal.
Oh, really? Okay.
And he sat in a part of the building close by, and he had mentioned it a couple of times, right, and was talking about it actually quite a bit. And I turned to one of the engineers and I just said, is this real? Like, what is this thing? And the engineer kind of blew it off like, no, it's fake, right? It's all nonsense. And so I didn't do anything. Didn't even Google it. Didn't do anything. And then again in 2016, I started to see more and more founders talking about Bitcoin, blockchain, crypto, etc. And that's when I really started to like kind of do work, was end of 16 into 2017.
What is the reason that if you take, for instance, PayPal Mafia, you have Max, you have Peter Thiel, you have Elon Musk, they are also, of course, super smart, but it seems like they're a bit splitted 50-50 in terms of how important they believe Bitcoin is, which means it has to be complicated, because if so many smart people disagree on this, it's kind of tricky to see what's the value here.
Yeah, I don't know if they disagree as much as some of them are very obviously interested in it, and some of them have their plate full with other things. So like take Elon Musk, right? Like he's come out on a podcast with Kathy Wood and the ARK Invest folks, and he basically said, look, paper money is going to be a thing of the past, right? Like paper money is going to go away. That sounds like a pretty pro Bitcoin and crypto statement to me. But then when he's asked, do you own Bitcoin? Do you whatever? He's like, somebody sent me one time, like, whatever. I think he kind of looks at it and he's like, I'm literally launching rockets and landing them on autonomous drones in the ocean, right? And then I've got the best electric car in the world, and I'm trying to scale, the first American, car company in a century, basically.
And trying to be in a relationship sometimes.
Yeah, and just like trying to live his life and just do all this crazy stuff, right? And then he's got, and by the way, I'm trying to put chips in people's brains and like all this shit going on, right?
A lot of kids as well. So, I mean, it's...
Yeah, and so just like, Bitcoin's not important to him,
exactly.
Right? He's like kind of like doing other things that he thinks are more important. So I don't know if he's like negative towards it, right? To me, it seems like he's like, yeah, of course that's going to happen. So like, I don't need to work on it because somebody else is going to do it.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas like no one was going to do the rockets, right? No one was going to do the electric cars. So he went and did the hard stuff.
Exactly.
And then if you look at, Peter Thiel, for example, like he's very pro Bitcoin.
He's loaded in Bitcoin, right? But he bought it at a high price, right?
I think he's got a lot.
Yeah, but he bought high price. The fund, right? I remember.
My guess is that there hasn't been just one purchase, right? I don't know. I have no information other than what you could read online. But I wouldn't be too worried about the prices that the billionaires are buying Bitcoin at.
Especially not now, since it's like some months back. It was a very good opportunity to buy last year. So yeah. Let's go a bit forward. Talk a bit about your day job today, how it's evolved. You're on TV every day. You like...
Yeah.
The Bitcoin influencer, do you like that term, or does it make you feel a bit awkward?
To be honest, the way that I think about what my job is to manage people's capital and deploy it into great companies that I believe are going to be very important in the future. Right. And so when I think about that, there's a couple of components to it. The first is there are very sophisticated, intelligent investors who are going to decide whether they are going to trust me and my partners with their capital. And that's a big responsibility, right? The second thing is those investors are not giving the money for me to go build a company, right? Or for one of my partners to go build a company. What they're doing is they're trusting our judgment to then go find partners, which are the founders, to build companies, right? So what we have to do is we have to serve two customers. We have to serve our investors and we have to serve our founders, right? And so it's kind of this balancing act between finding the common ground of what's best for both of them. And so as part of that, I think it's really important that people know what we believe, right? I think that it's one of these things where why you do something, what's the driving force behind it, how you think about what you're doing, all that stuff's really, really important. And so a very long time ago, I just said to myself, I believe that kind of open sourcing your thoughts, right? Oversharing, giving as much information out there as possible is a better way to operate than to do the opposite and not share anything. And the reason was, one, if you're correct, right, people kind of see you as you evolve your thought process and they understand and have more context around why you believe the things you believe. And then if you're wrong, you're using the power of the crowd to correct you, right? So if I tweet something and it's wrong, I know immediately that it's wrong, right? Because I got all these people who respond and tell me that it's wrong. So I think that this idea of being comfortable with failure in public was really empowering to me, and it allowed me to kind of start just writing all the time, tweeting, right? The podcast, all the stuff. Now, when it comes to the television stuff, we forget that crypto Twitter's not that big.
Yeah.
Right. We forget that like the newsletters, the podcast, it's all insular, right? It's all the people in crypto are listening to this stuff. They're reading this stuff. They're watching it. We have to break out into the mainstream, right? And so I've been very fortunate in that through a whole combination of relationships and some serendipity to be able to go onto television and talk about what all of us in crypto already know, right? Yeah. Like if you talk about Bitcoin in the crypto community, we all talk about Bitcoin the exact same way. We're all believers and we are really enthusiastic. Yeah. When you take that and you do the exact same thing, but rather than talk to other people in Bitcoin and crypto, and you do it to a mainstream national audience, right? To them, it's like groundbreaking. They're like, whoa, what are those people talking about, right? But it's trying to take the same message and just bring it to a new audience, which I think is really, really important because what it does is it slowly brings more people into Bitcoin and crypto. And it's not going to happen overnight, but every single time that myself or anyone else in the community goes on television, I think it's really, really important.
I don't know if you agree with this, but it's like, I think it's very important to simplify because when people talk to me about Bitcoin, I have a very easy tendency to like, okay, let's show my knowledge. Like it's decentralized, blah, 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 blah. But basically, if I ask them, can you explain me how a credit card works? It's very hard to explain. It's a deep technology process behind it. There's a lot of people involved. So do you think it's necessary for people to really know the process behind Bitcoin? Or is it just the fact that it works? It's a store of value. It's like, I mean, to me, that feels like that's the most important thing.
There are plenty of people who get upset when myself or others describe Bitcoin or anything with the industry really in very simplistic terms, right? They say, "Oh, that's not exactly true," right? Or "Oh, that you took the nuances out," right? And what they have to realize is, if I asked you what is HTTP, which is a protocol, right? And you describe to me the technical aspects, I would be like, whoa, that's way over my head. Doesn't sound important, right? If you instead said it's an open protocol that you could use to connect to information company, servers, all this stuff, right? Then all of a sudden, that actually sounds pretty important, right? And so I think that it's the difference between a technical description and like more of a consumer description. There's a time and a place for both, but it's understanding where's the time and the place, right, for each description. And so I make no, hidden qualms about it. I am not technical in the sense of going to go out and describe Bitcoin in highly technical terms. I don't think that serves the Bitcoin and crypto community the best. There's people who are way better at that than me. It doesn't serve my business well. And ultimately, I don't think it serves the audience's benefit either, right? Because there's people who are better at it than me to do that.
And you're also scaring people away to be way too technical. But
imagine if you went on, television and you recited the white paper.
Exactly.
Look, it's actually very well written, right? It's actually pretty simplistic, but it's still you could read it 10 times and each time you're like, wow, this is a pretty powerful document, right?
Exactly.
And so you've got to find ways to use analogies, right? Or kind of things that they already understand to get across these highly complex concepts. And I think that what you're seeing is the people who are able to do that well are getting the opportunities to do that in front of larger and larger audiences.
Do you have any favorites? I think accounting system for machines is a good one. Do you have any other you like to? Some tweets that explains Bitcoin simply and understandably?
So the way that I describe Bitcoin and then a blockchain, two separate things. One with Bitcoin, I literally just say you trust an algorithm with everything else in your life, right? For the most part, at some point you're going to trust an algorithm with your money. Right? Like, and by the way,
trust the email, right? You trust the email to go.
Well, and I use Google Maps, right? You trust it to tell you where you're going. Like you physically move your body depending on this algorithm. What information you put in. So the books it recommends you, the music it recommends you, all the stuff. You listen to an algorithm. When you Google things, the algorithm tells you the answer. I mean, like it's pretty crazy how much algorithms drive our, our lives. At some point, you're going to trust an algorithm to just secure your money. That's it, right? And so Bitcoin's a great way to do that. When it comes from to a blockchain, what I basically describe is triple entry accounting. We have two entry accounting, dual entry accounting today. There's been an invention of a piece of technology that now has created triple entry accounting. Triple entry accounting is really important because you no longer have to trust these centralized authorities. You can trust this triple entry accounting system. Most people are like, oh, triple entry accounting sounds pretty interesting, right? Like, don't know what I would use it for, but like sounds interesting. And so I think it's, again, just what's the most basic concept? Yeah. And I recently met with a guy who's now I would consider a friend. This guy, a Bitcoin rabbi, right? So he's a Hasidic Jew who wrote a book. But it's a children's book, and it describes the very complex topics around Bitcoin and blockchain for, essentially like a 5-year-old, right? It's kind of a story.
Perfect.
Meet this person. His name is Satoshi. Nobody really knows anything about Satoshi, right? Blah, blah, whatever. But as I was reading through this book, it hit me like this gentleman understands Bitcoin and blockchain technology better than most because he's had to distill it down to the most simple terminology so that a 5-year-old could understand it.
Isn't that a typical interview question at Google? Can you explain internet to a 5-year-old? Because it shows you how well you understand the concept because if you break it down, so it's a good way to doing that.
Absolutely.
Right?
And so when you go on television or you do podcasts or anything with a public audience, the way I look at it is you're basically talking to 5-year-olds, right? Not because the people on the other end aren't intelligent or sophisticated. It's that you have to relay a very complex topic in the kind of most simple terms possible.
It's also about being respectful to people because people don't have the time like us to read for many, many hours. Maybe they have children. Maybe they have things to do, a life. So, I mean, it's also about respect in my opinion.
Think about it. If let's say that, and I'm not saying this, but some people would say, take 1% of your net worth, right, and put it into Bitcoin, right? So just
some philosophy, right? Hedging for the global.
Yeah, so just 1%. Well, that means that the person should spend 99% of their time focused on other things than Bitcoin.
Exactly.
Right? It's only 1%. So like if their portfolio is a proxy for how they spend their time in terms of thinking on the finance side, this is like the smallest thing, right? Yeah. So they need to be very efficient in the use of their time and understanding it because it's only 1% of their time.
Can we go into the rabbit hole? Imagine that we're sitting into the government in Norway who just recently banned the tax that makes it possible to mine and stuff. And because there's some misconceptions out there. So I'll go through some of the most typical. This is like the title in the Norwegian financial papers, basically, right? So this is the narrative. Bitcoin only used by criminal. How do you answer that?
Look, every currency in the world is used by criminals, right? And if you look at something like money laundering, those nefarious actors do not want their transactions to be transparent, right? They want to be able to hide the transactions. A blockchain is a really bad place to try to hide transactions. So, look, it's not lost on me that people are going to use Bitcoin, the US dollar, the yen, or any other currency in the world to money launder or for criminal activity. It just happens to be that structurally, I think that a digital currency actually has a higher probability of deterring those criminal activities than encouraging them.
But let's also add that criminals are very good to finding new technology. So it's not like, of course, when Bitcoin was a new technology, of course criminals would be attracted to it because it's a new playing ground for them. So maybe also they have a point. In the start, criminals are very good to finding opportunities to do bad things. In whatever it is.
Of course. Look, every new technology starts on the fringes of society, right? The internet started with criminals, porn, gambling, all this stuff. And it's because they're constantly having to push the pace of innovation and find new technologies to kind of stay ahead of the law.
Yeah, so not get in jail, basically.
Exactly. And so it is the technology shouldn't get kind of attached to the criminal activity. Actually, from an investor standpoint, there's a lot of investors who say, well, what are the criminals using? What are the, kind of more vice type industries using? Because that technology will eventually permeate into and become pervasive in the rest of society. And so I think we just, again, it's just being rational about how much criminal activity is actually happening. I don't think that it's nearly as much as people think it is.
Exactly. Let's go to the one I find a bit tricky, not sustainable, the electricity argument.
Yep.
A more sophisticated argument.
So look, there's no secret that Bitcoin mining is a large consumer of energy. One, I think that is actually a positive thing, right? That's where the security comes from.
Of course.
So I explained to people, it's the most secure computing network in the world, right? Yeah. It should consume a lot of energy. That's what makes it so secure.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it. The second piece is because the cost is the largest input, like we talked about earlier in that business, people are constantly seeking out lower cost energy. Well, where's the lowest cost energy? in renewables. And so I actually would make the argument that I think that Bitcoin mining and other types of mining on the proof of work side are driving the adoption of and pushing the pace of innovation in renewable energy, because people have to go seek out the lowest cost power, and they're putting big dollars behind developing it.
Yeah, but I don't think we can forget that we have an environmental crisis. So of course, like I totally agree with that argument, but imagine if you meet people who are trying to save the world with energy, because we need a lot more energy. Of course, that person will have a problem with that. Maybe he doesn't understand Bitcoin. Maybe he doesn't understand.
So look, move to Central Washington, the state of Washington in the United States. In Central Washington, there was a massive surplus of hydropower, right? So what did happen? Bitcoin miners moved in and said, we'll take some of that off your hands, and the reason why it's cheap is because there's a surplus.
Yeah.
So that energy was already not being used, right? If you look in Iceland, for example, the geothermal energy, right? Yeah. If you look at other parts of the world, there's other types of renewable energy.
And in Norway, there are great resources, huge resources.
Of course. And so people are going to either have it sit there as a surplus, it'll expire, right? Because storing energy is really, really difficult. So that's another issue. And if we can monetize it in a way that is not killing the environment, right? It's not like mining is throwing up a bunch of black smoke in factories, right? It's a very different type of consumption of energy that's much cleaner.
And I also think my dream scenario, if I manage to build my data center in Northern Norway, would be that we use the heat and provide the heat to houses, because the houses needs to be warm during winter time. So you store that heat, put it down, and takes it to the house. That would be a great scenario.
It would be amazing. Absolutely. I think there's people who have built kind of very small, like they've hacked together systems like that, where they mine in their shed and they use it to heat their home, that type of stuff. But if you could do it on a large scale, it'd be very, very valuable.
So the last one, can't do transaction in big scale. And I think this is a very huge question, because many have the feeling that Bitcoin, the white paper, is really Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin SV. So, this is a large question, but you view it as a gold, digital gold, right? So you don't want to buy your coffee with Bitcoin. It's not the purpose for Bitcoin. So is that argument, how do we view that argument that Bitcoin is not a transaction? The transaction is in fintech and Alipay and maybe Facebook now, so it's a big question. But
people have to remember that the fiat system was built the exact same way. We're seeing history, maybe not repeat, but rhyme for sure.
Yeah.
Right? So we had gold. Gold was a currency. Everyone used it. We realized, it's not really that great for transactions. So we created paper claims to the gold, right? Which ended up becoming dollars. Yeah. Those dollars, eventually, then we built electronic money on top of it, credit, all these things got built on top of gold as a non-scalable use for transactions, as a store of value medium of exchange. And then we kind of built layer 2, layer 3, layer 4 on top of it. The same thing's happening with Bitcoin, right? Yeah. It is the Bitcoin that we talk about today is acting very similar to gold. It's a store of value, right? You can use it for a medium of exchange. Yep. It's just not ideal, right?
Yes.
And so what we're seeing is the early stages of the infrastructure being built for layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, where it will become highly, highly scalable in the future. And when that happens, I think people are going to look back and be like, oh, wow, that was really, really obvious that you had to have the core foundation layer before you could build those other layers on top.
Could you say something thoughtful about Facebook's Calibra? I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because
I have no thoughtful thoughts ever.
But is that the killer app that Robin has been waiting for? The email to the internet? Is Facebook the killer app for crypto?
Bitcoin is the killer app, and it's already bigger than Venmo, Apple Pay, right? PayPal, etc. So it's available in more countries. It's got more on-chain transaction volume than they did annually, right? All this stuff. The thing that I think a bunch of other people are looking for, like those guys, is they want to see the Facebook of the internet, right? They want to see the Google of the internet. What they have to realize is that the Facebook of the internet, it could very easily be the Binances, the Coinbases, the Geminis, the Krakens, the Circles of the world, right? Like that is infrastructure around this application, right? Yep. On top of that, the miners. And there's people who've built massive mining businesses, right? Yeah. Those are more applications of the technology. People who are running this stuff, it's like the developer tools, like all this stuff, right? So I think that the framework people are applying where they're saying like, where's the decentralized application that's, the future, like this technology that doesn't matter until we get that. I just tend to think that, yes, like there will probably be decentralized applications in the future. Yeah. We don't get to have those until we get the infrastructure and the foundational protocols correct.
It's also about looking behind the scenes. You see Amazon having doing some stuff on Ethereum. You see Microsoft. You see so much things going on in the R&D department, and that's basically where you should be viewing if you want to try to forecast the future, right? But also, in my opinion, if I could like bet on one company to be huge, I would bet on Coinbase. Mm-hmm. In my mind, there's no reason why Coinbase can't be the next Google in like 5, 10, 15 years.
Look, there's a bunch of companies that are coming out of that space, whether it's Kraken, Gemini, Coinbase, Circle, all of them, right? Even Binance, right? They're all just building a very, very different model. Yeah. And I think that there's going to be companies that end up being worth hundreds of billions, if not over $1 trillion in this industry. And the key is to go and try to find them.
Can you say something about, imagine if someone in Norway that has to work with the regulations and stuff, do you have anything you can say to why we should open up to the mining activity? Is it possible to like give an argument for why it's a bad idea to scare these actors away?
Yeah, look, I am on record as saying the countries that use regulation to incentivize entrepreneurs, innovation, economic activity are going to drastically benefit more than the countries that use regulation to repel or disincentivize people from doing that. In this industry, there's a couple of ways that you can benefit from it if you are a nation state. One is you can actually just expose yourself to Bitcoin. So you just buy Bitcoin, put it on your balance sheet. That's pretty good. It's a scarce asset, probably going to be valuable in the future. Two is you can incentivize private companies to move in, or you can incentivize the building of infrastructure. The biggest argument, I think, for a nation state to embrace something like mining is you are simply encouraging your country to have more computing power underneath or within its borders. Some of that computing power can only be used for the Bitcoin blockchain, right? Like the ant miners, etc.
Yeah.
There's other computers like the GPUs, etc., that can be used not only for just mining cryptocurrencies, but certain pieces of technology can actually be used for things like autonomous driving, 3D rendering, DNA sequencing,
Neuralink or Elon Musk's Neuralink probably in the future. Who knows?
It's just computing power,
yeah,
right? So there's GPU, CPU, TPU, right? There's all these different processing units, right, that have been created, and different types of products or companies that need computing power need the different types or variations. And so having a lot of computing power inside your borders is probably going to prove to be a good decision in the future.
Which means that Norway, which has a huge amount of sustainable green energy, that's like having steel. And like you said that analogy.
They should have a huge advantage, right?
Exactly.
If people always say data is the new oil, well, then that makes the computing power the steel.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And the country that is the biggest steel producer did all right.
Yeah, definitely. Can we talk a bit about the price? Or let's start with a normal person, let's say between 20, 40 years old, not tech savvy, but likes innovation, likes to save money. Mm-hmm. How much Bitcoin should that person have? Or is it like 1% is fair?
Each person is different, right? Yeah. It's all about the risk profile, your other responsibilities. So it's too hard to kind of make a blanket statement as to one certain percentage. With that said, though, the way that I describe it to folks is it is a non-correlated asymmetric asset, meaning it does not move in lockstep with other assets, either up or down, right? Yeah. So the value drivers are different. A stock, for example, is driven by revenue, profits, GDP, interest rates, etc. This asset of Bitcoin is not driven by those same things.
What are they driven by?
Right? Well, it's driven by the fundamentals. It's a network, right? And so the advantage I had early in looking at this stuff is having worked at Facebook, I understand how networks and technology products grow, right? So I always use the example of if you have a mobile app, and let's say you run a marketing campaign and you sign up 100 new people, and then there's 30% of them, so 30 people, try out the product. They don't like it right after a week or two and they leave and they don't use it anymore. So they kind of churn out.
Yeah.
Well, you had a net gain of 70 people. Then there's another influx of users. Then there's some of the percentage of those churn out, right? Then you have another acquisition of users. Some of those churn out. But each time you're having a net new gain of users, right? And so over time, the retention ends up being really, really important.
Yeah.
And so the network effect locks people in and retains them.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is experiencing that. That's what these kind of bull and bust cycles look like, right? Or they're acting like, is the same exact way that technology products grow.
But in my mind, the crazy thing with Bitcoin, and I'm guilty of this. People say to me, I have a fair amount of Bitcoin, at least in my net worth, right? And I'm saying to them, I'll never sell. I want to die with the Bitcoin. And I don't know if you're the same, but imagine if you have a system where the people who are in it don't want to sell. And if you add more people into the system, what do you think will happen with the price?
Supply and demand economics are a beautiful thing. And I literally think it's such a simple concept that people
It's too simple, right?
They're confused.
Yeah.
They're like, there's no way that this is possible. What do you mean? How does this work? Blah, blah, blah.
Look at the media, like, oh, there's a trade war. That's why the Bitcoin go. Oh, of course, I'm not saying it's not an important factor. Of course, the more unstable world you have, the more you tend to go to the scarce asset. But still, to my mind, it's a bit too simple to just find something bad going on in the world and say that's the reason why Bitcoin goes up.
Completely agree.
Yeah. Okay, I want to try some segments here.
Okay.
This one is called Overrated or Underrated. So I explain a concept and you say if you think personally it's overrated or underrated. So aliens, overrated or underrated?
Underrated. Underrated for sure. People I think are like, oh, that's crazy to think about aliens.
It's not.
I tend to think that we probably know more about aliens than we're being told, right? Like the human race knows more about aliens.
And you
than
guys
the
know
average
more
person.
about it, right? The US knows more about it.
Probably. The US probably knows a lot, right? And so with that said, I could easily see the narrative changing very quickly if all of a sudden people are like, whoa, like somebody had contact with an alien. All of a sudden it would become like the most important thing, right? There's a species other than humans who may come here.
Yeah. We probably know
Pretty
more,
scary, huh?
We probably know more about aliens than the Mariana Trench, where we haven't been. It's the deepest place in so I completely agree. Higher education?
I think that higher education is overrated and underrated.
Yep.
Overrated from you have to have this piece of paper to have the qualifications to get a job. I think that's really stupid.
Expensive insurance, right?
Yeah, it's just it's expensive. It might not even be insurance in some cases, right? And I don't think that people actually learn that much, right? Yeah. I think it's highly underrated for all of the social skills, the network you build, so like all the soft parts or the benefits of
maybe travel across the world to take. I mean, it's
all
great.
kinds of things, right? You came to the U.S. for a semester, right? Like all stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a bunch of soft benefits that go unmentioned because people simply look at what's the information you retained, what's the piece of paper you get at the end, and how much did it cost.
Yeah.
And so overrated in that sense, underrated with all the other stuff.
Follow your passion.
Follow your passion, I think, is a underrated idea. Mainly because I think that when people say follow your passion, they think about what am I passionate about? Okay, I should do this for a job. I look at it as out of all of the jobs that either you're going to go work for somebody else or that you're going to create, right? So you're going to start a company or whatever. I'd say look at all the options and then pick the one you're most passionate about. Yeah. Right. So if you just said, if I said to you, what are you passionate about? And you said, I really like to paint. Right. And then you said, oh, I'm going to go start a business around painting. That's a little hard to do.
Maybe graphic designer, try to steer that passion into something.
Well, if I said to you, hey, there's 4 job opportunities that you have, right? One is as an engineer, one's as an accountant, one's as a lawyer, and one's as a graphic designer. Yeah. Then you say the one I'm most passionate about is graphic design. It's not exactly being an artist. I like to paint, but it's close enough where I get to get really close to being an artist, right? But I get to have a job that I can live on as well.
Totally agree. Living in the US to make it. From a Norwegian standpoint, or
so I think that there's 2 components here. One is you can definitely do anything anywhere, right? Meaning that there are people, there's knowledge on the internet, there's access to money, all that kind of stuff.
Freelancers,
exists anywhere in the world. I do think that there's a significant advantage to being in major metros, whether that is San Francisco, New York, even London, Singapore, etc. Right? So it's not just the US, but just major metros in general. LA, right?
I think it depends what you mean by making it, because if you're going to scale something huge, I think you
got to be in Silicon Valley. I truly believe that if you put on a ranking of, if you want to scale a technology company,
important. Yeah.
Silicon Valley is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5 on the list. Yeah. And then there's not anything else on the list.
Maybe China, but then you have to kind of change your personality and go into a system that...
I don't even think that is possible to do it there compared to what you can do in Silicon Valley.
Working as an VC, I mean, that's what everybody wants to do. It's what my friends want to do, want to be a VC. Why did that happen? Because everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, Mark Zuckerberg, and now everybody wants to be Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen. What happened there? What's the narrative?
I think that there's a lot of people who they don't know what they want to do, so they just kind of gravitate to whatever they think is the latest trend. For me, being an investor is... I can't imagine a better job than it, just because I get to spend every day with people who are working on really, really hard problems, and they're incredibly intelligent. And it's just, I learn so much and I enjoy learning. So I think a lot of people say like, oh, I would love to do that job because I could give money to people. I think I can make a lot of money, all this kind of stuff. It's very capitalistic driven. For me, there's days that absolutely suck, right? Like they suck.
In everything you do, it sucks.
Here is what I'll tell a true story. So 2 weeks ago, I literally went and I started in New York, and over on Monday night, I left and I flew to Dallas, Texas. I spent Tuesday morning and the early part of the afternoon. Then I flew to Austin, Texas. I spent Tuesday night, Wednesday during the day. Wednesday night, I flew. I had to get to Montreal for a meeting on Thursday, but there was no direct flights. So I flew from Austin, Texas to Charlotte, North Carolina for a layover. From Charlotte to New York, I drove home. I showered. I landed at 11:30. I showered. I did not go to sleep. I went back to a different airport in New York. I got on a flight at 6 a.m. I flew to Montreal, but I had a layover in Philly. Went to Montreal, went to a meeting, just one meeting, went right back to the airport, flew to Philadelphia on Thursday. Slept Thursday night in Philadelphia, went to a meeting Friday morning, and took the train from Philadelphia back to New York.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. So that is from New York to Dallas to Austin, back to Charlotte to New York to Philly to Montreal, back to Philly, back to New York. So that's 9 different stops in cities, right? In a 5-day span, and all those different flights. It wasn't fun for 99% of the time. But what was fun was the meetings, right? The things that I went to go do in each one of those places. Yeah. And so it's very similar to what you see with a lot of people on social media, etc. You don't get to see the non-glamorous part of the job. You just see the glamorous part. And so it doesn't mean that, hey, this job sucks. Like, this job is literally the best job in the world. I could not imagine doing anything better than this ever. But it doesn't come without side effects. And so I think people just got to get a clearer picture of the pros and the cons. And then they'll see, do you really want to do this? Yeah. Or do you just want the glamorous side of this job and you're going to hate the non-glamorous side?
It's not being a soccer player. Sometimes you have to train before you go out and score. But
the best ones actually suffer the most, right?
Exactly. So a personal one, being a soldier?
Yeah.
Underrated, overrated?
I loved it. It was very much
at the time or in after?
Oh, when I was doing it, I absolutely loved it. It was like the greatest thing in the world.
Oh, it was.
Yeah. Because
people try and kill you. You loving it?
Well, I was 17 years old when I went to basic training, right? So it was like this like summer camp. Like, oh, sweet, we get to shoot guns, we get to go in helicopters and do all this crazy stuff. And then I went to Iraq when I was 20. And you're literally too dumb to know that it's dangerous, right? You're just like, you think that you're Superman, you nothing could happen to you, all this stuff. You look back, like, that was pretty dangerous. Yeah. But yeah, when I went, it was a great experience, and shaped a lot of the way I think today.
Can we do what you have learned from people? Because you work with some incredible people. We have Mark. I don't know if he's your boss, but something you learned from him, some key ideas or some key insights.
Yep. So I got 2 partners. I got Jason Williams, Mark Yusko.
Them both. Mark, something you learned from them both.
Yeah, I think I'll start with Mark. So Mark has really, really helped me learn a lot about finance, traditional investing, risk management, the institutional world, all this stuff.
He seems stable as a rock when you hear him talk.
He's professional. He's a professional.
He doesn't lose it here in the.
He's a professional.
Yeah. Wow.
And so he, the one piece of advice that I always tell everyone that Mark told me, I one time asked him, I said, what separates the 5 best in the world, the 5 best investors in the world from the next 25 peers that they have? So I don't care about the difference between the good ones and the bad ones. I want to know the absolute best from the great, right? What separates them? And he said one simple thing. They cut their losers faster than anyone else, and they press the winners harder than anyone else. That one piece of advice will serve me, well for the rest of my life. So he's been incredibly helpful, thoughtful. He'll never get enough credit for having the courage to do all this that he should. But just super, super thankful for him to be willing to.
But
do
that
this
advice doesn't. I mean, we're talking about investing here, but my core concept, or when thinking about this, the advice you gave now. Apply that to dating.
Everything.
Get rid of the 5 worst dates you have and double down on the good one. Maybe
of course. And I used to joke with friends that said anything worth doing is worth overdoing, right?
Exactly.
Pretty similar concept, right? But definitely true. And then with Jason, Jason and I have known each other longer than I've known Mark. And Jason and I, when we first met, just absolutely hit it off immediately. And it was because we had 2 very different life experiences. We came from different worlds. He's got a wife and 3 kids and all stuff, right? Okay. And at the time I was single and just kind of a young guy and all stuff, but we had the same mentality. Okay. And it was, you don't have to be the smartest. You don't have to be the best, right? But you can absolutely outwork people, right? And in
a healthy way, right? You don't want to drive yourself to the ground.
It depends on what you want to do, right? Yeah. If you asked Elon Musk what his work-life balance is, he would say there is no fucking balance, right? I work. Yeah. He's got no life, right? But he's also Elon Musk, right? Yeah. So he's doing something that no one else can do because he's willing to do things that no one else is willing to do, right? So it really depends on what's your goal. Do you want to be Elon Musk? Yeah. You're not going to have a work-life balance. Yeah. That's bullshit, right? If you want to be successful, you can definitely have a work-life balance, right? It just depends on how far down the spectrum do you want to go in terms of that success, right? Yeah. And so I think that's really, really important for people to understand. And then on top of that, I also think
was that the key learn from Jason, or did I?
Jason definitely, that was a piece of it. The other piece, so one was just like, hey, work, right? The other piece is Jason has very much taught me patience and discipline when it comes to situations, right? So there's this idea that a lot of young people, and some of it's just age, some of it's just the society we've grown up in, we want instant gratification. I have an idea, I want it to pay off immediately, right? Whereas when you're a little bit older and you've kind of been around for a while, right? You understand, hey, great things take a really long time to build, and you don't have to have it today, right? Just make sure you're doing the right things, and you'll turn around in 5, 10, 15 years later, you'll be like, wow, we built something pretty freaking amazing here, right? Yeah. It just took a while to do it, and so the discipline and the patience paid off.
Yeah, exactly. Personal one, Paulina.
Paulina, she's amazing. She
can do another podcast just on that question, or
I could talk about her forever. So Paulina is my girlfriend. We've been dating for a while. She grew up in Bulgaria, moved to the U.S. when she was 9 or 10 years old, to Atlanta, lives with me here in New York City now. And, it's the classic example of I found somebody who was smarter than me, kinder than me, more ambitious than me, and definitely not funnier than me. I'm still funnier than she is. But I think that when you surround yourself with those types of people, right? She has a lot of the same qualities that my partners Jason and Mark have, in that you feel like you have to level yourself up when you're around them, right? So Jason and Mark do that in a business sense. Paulina does that in almost every other aspect of my life, right? And so
how's the balance in a relationship? Is it like you both working all around the clock, or?
We work a lot, but we are very intentional about spending time together, right? Last night, for example, we made sure we went to dinner, right? We're not playing with our phones. We went on for a walk after dinner, like all this stuff. And it's just, it doesn't matter that it's, we didn't spend 6 hours together today, right? But the time we spent together was high quality time that we really both enjoyed.
Quality over quantity, right?
Yeah. And also then there's certain things like on the weekends, we do everything together, right? And I jokingly said to her the other day, you're my best friend. And she got all excited about it. And she was like, you're my best friend too, right? and it was also just kind of being stupid. But at the same time, it's, when you are able to do that stuff, right? You have similar interests, et cetera. I think that it's really, really powerful because when I need to go somewhere for work, right? She comes with me, right?
Like the week you talked about, the crazy week?
Yeah, she does not come. So the one thing that she does not do is she hates traveling when I'm doing all this crazy stuff, right? But, she had to go to a conference, right? And so I went with her to that. And so we're able to kind of go to things with each other. And it's just cool because, you don't feel like every single time I have to go home and like, oh, what'd you do today at work, right? But we get a lot of overlap. And so it's just fun to be able to do it together. And
awesome.
She's probably listening to this right now and is going to tell me that I'm embarrassing her. But I'm incredibly lucky, so she deserves it.
Awesome. I think we only some few dilemmas and then some final thoughts from your behalf. So I have some dilemmas here. You can just answer quickly. Get to know who created Bitcoin or having one Bitcoin go up to $1 million. What do you choose?
I don't want to ever know who created Bitcoin. I think there's incredible value in us not knowing who created it.
So let's say alien created it, maybe.
We can say whoever you want created it, but I think there's incredible value in us not knowing, and I don't want to know.
But someone created it, right? So at
somebody
point,
did, whether it's an individual or group, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. Get to invest early in Barstool Sports or build the first successful data center on Mars. What do you choose? I know you love Barstool Sports. So.
I'm a huge believer in Barstool's business model. And Dave, if you're listening, I wrote an article. This is probably it's probably more than 2 years ago now, where I said that Barstool is going to be $1 billion media empire.
Wow.
And everyone was laughing. It was a $15 million company. And I tried to invest. They told me no. And it looks like they're going to hit $1 billion. And it was just very clear from early on that they were going to be able to pull this off. And so it's pretty cool.
So you'll invest in them and you let Elon build a data center on Mars. You're fine with that.
Look, somebody's going to build a data center on Mars, but first we got to get there, right? So it's like, there's kind of a sequence of events that have to occur.
Build a new company with Mark Zuckerberg or with the Winklevoss twins. Which you choose? Who do you partner up with for the next venture?
I think they're both different, right? Each one of them brings different skills to the table, different experiences, different views on the world. And so it really depends on what you're going to build. It's like building any team, right?
So no preference for you on your behalf.
No, I'm fans of both of them. I tend to think that they're both, Cameron and Tyler, and then also Mark are super successful. They're both very thoughtful. They're intelligent. Yeah. And the part that I actually, I've been fortunate enough to know all three of them.
Are they good people?
All
of them?
three are incredibly kind.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And now look. That doesn't mean that they're kind 100% of the time. That doesn't mean that they've done bad things. But
they don't have bad intention when they build stuff. They just I
truly don't believe that. In my experiences with them, in the things that we did, or in the conversations I've had with them, they've always been kind, at least to me, right? Yeah. So it's like somewhere, right, that they're kind people, and I tend to think that about a lot of people in the world, right? So maybe it's just me being overly optimistic, but I tend to think that most people are good people, and look. Everyone's getting their information about these folks from the media, right? They're getting their information from some third-party source. It's just hard to kind of judge someone without ever, meeting them, talking to them, etc.
Exactly. It's been an honor having you on the podcast. Do you have any final thoughts? I mean, you write a very good newsletter each day. Maybe you can say it's Off the Chain, right?
Off the Chain.
People should know about that if they want to.
People can just go to offthechain.substack.com and they can find it there. But I only got one final thought, man. It's the only thought I ever got. Long Bitcoin, short the bankers.
Perfect ending. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.